So good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited that you have joined us. And on behalf of the Center for Urban Language Teaching and Research here at Georgia State University, I welcome you to the 6th Annual World Languages Week. CULTR, as the center is known, is one of 16 federally funded Title VI language resource centers in the United States. And CULTR has created a unique identity around serving the needs of all students and the communities they represent to help promote language learning opportunities as part of 21st century global education. And guided by its core values of access, advocacy, outreach, and research, CULTR has gained a national reputation for innovative approaches to promoting access to language education for all students, regardless of their socioeconomic background. So I am Professor Monica Swan. I'm a professor in the School of Public Health here at Georgia State University, and I'd like to thank you for being here in our panel on public health and humanitarian issues. I'm going to moderate this panel, but before we start and introduce our panelists, I want to give you some housekeeping issues about how this session will work. First of all attendees will remain muted through the entire session. Except of course the speakers. If for some reason your connection is interrupted and we've known that there's been a few issues, just log back in with the link that you were provided. If the event reaches capacity, attendees may tune into a live stream that we have on YouTube, so you can still follow us there. Our panel discussion will last approximately 35 to 40 minutes, and we'll have some prepared questions and engagement with our panelists. And then we're going to have a Q&A where all of you can chime in through the Q&A box, usually below your screen. And if you see a question already raised that you like, give it a thumbs up. Use the thumbs up icon, and we know that question will float to the top, and we'll make sure to try to ask it during the Q&A session. And so I also like to draw your attention back to the event website. You'll find a lot of information there, like the curriculum guide for teachers and for students, their instructions on download the app called Goose Chase. So look there for more information. You can also sign up there for a virtual scavenger hunt with prizes for the top scoring schools. So there are a lot of activities that we have embedded in this programming. But what I want to do now is to introduce our phenomenal panelists. I want to thank them for joining us and for sharing their time and for engaging with all of us. I'm going to just introduce them in the order of what we had on the flyer, although I know that our first speaker, I think, might still have some technical issues. But we have Brandy Blue, who is a Human Rights Program Associate with the Carter Center, so let's hope she can join us shortly. We have Sara Hoffman, Senior Technical Advisor for the Water Team for CARE. We have Gregory Huger, who is the Regional Director for Inter-America and Pacific Region Peace Corps. And we also have Hermence Matsotsa, who is the Global Health and Cross-Cultural Communication Workforce Development Consultant for Ubuntu Speaks. So I'm going to give each of you panelists a second to introduce yourself a little bit in more detail. So just about where you work and some of the key relevant themes here for our panel. And again, warmly welcome you. I guess we were in person, we would have a huge applause at this point. Sara, can I ask that you may start to introduce yourself with a little more details than I provided?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Monica. Hi, everyone. My name's Sara. I'm a senior technical advisor on CARE's Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene team. So CARE is a large international nonprofit that's based in Atlanta, and we work all over the world. And so I'm on the Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene team, and we work with governments and communities and businesses to try to come up with sustainable solutions to give everyone clean water and a toilet.
Well, thank you. Super exciting to hear more about your work soon. All right, and Gregory, may you say also a few more things about where you work, the Peace Corps?
Yes, thanks very much, Monica, and I'm honored and pleased to have the opportunity to participate in this panel. I'm the Regional Director for the Peace Corps for Latin America, Caribbean, and the Pacific Islands. And the Peace Corps is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. The mission of the Peace Corps as a US government agency funded by Congress and the taxpayers is to promote international peace and friendship in the world. And it has three concrete objectives. The first is to provide people with technical skills to countries to help them with their development. The second one is to give the people in the countries served, where the volunteers are stationed, the opportunity to get to know more about the American people in the United States through these volunteers who are normally on 2 years assignments, living in communities, very often with local families and working in local schools or health posts or in various organizations. And the third of the three objectives of the Peace Corps is to give the American people a better idea of the world in which we live and the people who are there, so that the volunteers, when they return from their service, as I said, normally 2 years, sometimes it goes up to 5, are, as I am, representatives of the country where they served and the people that they met there. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa in the 60s, and I always have the Côte d'Ivoire on my mind and can speak about it.
Well, fantastic. And thank you for sharing that. I'm sure we're going to get lots of questions about that. And can we have Hermence, can you introduce yourself and do the same thing? Tell a little bit more about your experience as Ubuntu Speaks. And then Brandy, I saw that you joined us. We will introduce you after that.
Hey, hello everyone. Bonjour, hola, adunpo, and assalamu alaikum. So my name is Hermence Matsotsa, and I am CEO and founder of Ubuntu Speaks. And so we are a consulting firm. We provide essential critical soft skills to individuals in various different corporations, universities, but mainly who are seeking to work internationally. And we also work with, we address cross-cultural communication, the importance of that, and how people can come together from diverse backgrounds and work as a team to resolve some of our greatest concerns and problems here in the world. And so for me, my background, similar to Gregory's, is that I was a Peace Corps volunteer. In fact, my father was a Peace Corps volunteer also, and I've served in 3 different countries. And because of that experience and that upbringing that I had, living in different places around the world and meeting people from different cultures and having to learn languages as I went along, because I love to speak, and therefore I had to learn how to learn the language in order to communicate, right? And so that all in a nutshell has really helped my business in the sense that I understand the importance of learning a language, speaking it well, communicating with others, and that cultural competency that oftentimes languages help you acquire. So that I'm Hermence Matsotsa.
Thank you so much. Super thrilled to hear more about your experiences and the questions that we're going to have in a minute. But Brandy, thank you also for joining us. I just really told the audience that you were the Human Rights Program at the Carter Center, but could you also give us a little bit more details about your work at the Carter Center and how that fits in with today's panel?
Sure, absolutely. So I work, like you said, in the Human Rights Program at the Carter Center. The Carter Center is an international NGO founded by former President Jimmy Carter, and we aim to improve democracy, peace, and health all over the world. In my specific position, I work with the Democratic Republic of Congo. I am an attorney. I did half of my law school at Tulane in New Orleans and half in Paris. And I'm also a Peace Corps alum from Peace Corps Morocco.
Well, fantastic. We're so glad that you can join us and share your experiences. I've just been notified we have an additional panelist, also from the Peace Corps. Flora Tano, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Flora Tano, and am, I was the designated Peace Corps representative for Georgia State University. I recently received a promotion, and I'm here as a returned Peace Corps volunteer, having done my service in China, but also to just also share my experience as a Peace Corps recruiter for the state of Georgia, and share a bit about the various unique opportunities that Peace Corps does offer.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We're glad that you're with us. So we're going to transition into some questions for the panelists to really sort of maximize our knowledge and really have a dialogue. But before we do, I want to do a greeting in Luganda, a language that we speak in Uganda. Uganda has many languages, but in Sanyase Okukulaba, which means I'm very pleased to meet all of you. And in my global health work, I think it has been critically important to learn many languages. I'm from Sweden originally, so obviously I speak Swedish. You can tell I speak English, and I've been dabbling in several other languages. And as Hermence was saying just moments ago, I think in my own experiences that learning the languages where you work, for those of us that are working international or in the global health context or in humanitarian settings, there is a very different way one can connect with the communities, one can connect with the work that we're doing. And I also think that there's this general connection with the communities we may serve or the people we interact with, even for just trying to learn the language. I know sometimes it's hard here in the US to really talk about the value of languages, which I think was this World Languages Week is all about, to think about languages and culture. But some of the questions that we have for the panel, and because we know we're very mindful of our student audience, we are primarily high school and college students joining us today. I want to hear from the panel what you think the role that language proficiency and cultural awareness play in the recruiting and hiring in your organization or in the experiences you've had. So what value does organizations put on this language proficiency or ability to learn and communicate in these ways?
I would like to say something about the Peace Corps' approach to that. Clearly, in the work that the Peace Corps does in 61 countries around the world, living the volunteers for 2 years or more in local communities and working in local organizations, very often in health and in education and in agriculture. Language is very important. However, we do not require language proficiency as a sine qua non of being accepted to come in as a volunteer. Rather, Peace Corps has developed over its 60 years of existence one of the best language training programs in the world. And we train the people that come in. 85% of the people that come into the Peace Corps are graduates of US universities, undergraduate or graduate school. Median age is 24. So Peace Corps trains the people who come in as to be volunteers in the language that they will be speaking in the community where they will be working. Very often this is French, certainly in West Africa, and you'll see many other countries where French is widely spoken. It also includes Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, many other languages, and including many local languages that are spoken by the ethnic groups in the area where we work. So for example, I was involved in setting up the Peace Corps in the early 70s in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, then called Zaire. And so I learned at that time Lingala and Swahili to go with the French that I already spoke. I'd make a point too about the value of language learning in an international career. I'm now 52 years into my international career, having started it as a volunteer in the Côte d'Ivoire. But it is absolutely important to speak the language of the people with whom you're going to live and work. There are so many things that come out when you can speak the same language and you can understand the world in that context. If you go to Japan, they have 26 different levels of politeness built into their language. And in some cases, they don't, like in Brazilian Portuguese, there's no word for privacy. So there are a lot of things that one has when one speaks a language, and all of those allow you to be more effective and to have a lot better time and to move into a broader world. Life and work are not linear, they're integral.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. Other panelists who might want to chime in their experiences or from their organization?
Yeah, I would like to add, I love what Gregory said about speaking the language of the people. And, one of the quickest ways to really be integrated and accepted amongst the people different than your own or that unfamiliar with is when you can say hello, you can greet them in their language. Not only does it show that you respect them because you're greeting them, you're trying to communicate with them, but it also lets others know that you recognize who they are. You see them. And that is really, really essential. I know within Ubuntu Speaks, we are looking for individuals who are open-minded and curious about other people, who are curious about various different cultures, who are open to, when traveling, not traveling as I am going there to impose who I am as an American, as a person, impose my culture onto other people, but I'm traveling so I can learn how other people in this environment live and how they choose to be. And oftentimes when you have, if you've learned the language or are curious about learning the language or speak it, more importantly, speak it, then you're able to not only communicate, but you're to differentiate some of the nuances and you're able to dive in deeper within the culture. So it is really, really important. And I feel like, he mentioned before, Peace Corps does do a great job at the language training when you are in country. But it's all, there are other ways also, if it's Peace Corps is not the direction that you want to go to, even in middle school and in high school, get to know other people who speak other culture, who speak other languages. The great thing now is a lot of us we are starting to come together as society in different communities where you can identify someone who speaks Spanish and you can identify someone who speaks Korean and Japanese or French or whatever language. Be open to approaching that person and asking them if they can teach you, if they can give you a few words, if they can tell you more about their culture. So it's about stepping out and being curious enough to want to learn, but then also taking what you learn to apply it to seeing people for who they are and where they come from.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of insight there and there's a lot of depth in it. And I think that's why it's so important that we have World Languages Week and we have our center culture to really infuse these and start early with our students.
Right.
Another question that I have for the panelists is what top qualities or characteristics, maybe the top 2 or 3, that you think that are really critical for success for those who want to work in global health or as humanitarian and really leave the US and work in a broader context? What skills do you think?
I think, there's a lot of skills necessary in humanitarian work. I would say, not just because I'm on this panel, that language is integral to the job. For me personally, learning French has driven my entire career and has been an immeasurable aspect of why I've gotten hired everywhere that I have. So I think that that's because learning another language not only shows the commitment, but also the intellectual curiosity to expand your mind. And that comes to my second point, which is resilience. Resilience is very important in the humanitarian context. It's a difficult working environment. Most people don't do it for the money or the fame. It's can be very complicated. And so resilience would be number 2. And number 3, I think, at least for me personally, what I always try to do is just continually question my role in the humanitarian world and the world at large, the role of my organization, what work we are doing, listen, be a good listener to people around you, so that, the humanitarian world isn't just for people that just follow the rules. We're supposed to be questioning and changing and evolving all the time.
Well, I think it is a great list. So, knowing the language or knowing different languages, resilience and questioning, right? Really be proactive. What are we doing? How are we helping? Or what is our role here? But I'm sure there might be other qualities too, depending on where you work and how you do your work. So are there other thoughts for the panelists on skills and traits that you see should be on the top list here for people who want to do this work?
This is Flora. I think for us, for Peace Corps, we look for Americans who are open, flexible, and adaptable, because you are going into a community that may be very different from what you're used to here in the US. But the fact that you are open and you are willing to learn their ways, you are willing to live like them, because when you go and work abroad, you're going to be working with the locals. You'll have to learn things from their perspective and adapt their perspective. You're not coming in with your, you may come in with your ideas, but you have to learn to work alongside them. So for us at Peace Corps, that's really skills that when we assess candidates, we really seek for that open-minded adaptability and flexibility.
And I agree. I think that those are also critically important skills. I take students from US here, from Georgia State, to a study abroad program in Uganda, and we have lots of conversations about this. And I know many of our students want to roll up their sleeves and go and help and really contribute. And I think that is sort of the state way or university way. We really want to make a difference. But sometimes stepping back and listening and learning can actually be a more impactful way of contributing long term. And even though I only take the students for a couple of weeks, there's a lot that they can learn. And I also talk about how they can give back later. So being patient about figuring out what is that impact that they can have longer term. So I think that those are really important skills. How about the rest of the panelists? Anything to add? We have some really great skills on that list, but is there anything you feel like should float to the top here that you want to add to this conversation?
I would add interpersonal communication skills. I think it's crucial. There are globally, cultures communicate not just verbally, but there's a lot of non-verbals that, as a way of communicating. So being able to understand that, but then also interpersonal communications, realizing that when you're going somewhere, it's not just about the mission, but it's about the relationships that you build with the people that you're going to be working with. And so it might mean when you come to a meeting, the meeting may not, the agenda says that the meeting starts at 8 a.m., but it might actually start at 10 because 2 hours has been spent on greeting everyone at the meeting and asking them how they are and getting to know those individuals. And so I have found that in my work, a lot of Americans will get frustrated with the fact that the time is not what is set on paper or what is concrete. And so understanding that interpersonal communication and building relationships is very essential in many cultures because it helps to build trust and it helps to, it allows individuals to know who they are working with and who they choose to spend their time and their life with. And that's how a lot of cultures see it. So you're not just a colleague, but oftentimes you turn out to be a friend, a brother in a sense. So it's really important that, knowing how to say hello and knowing how to greet other people, being able to observe when someone needs space or when they are entering your space and knowing what words and how your body language communicates how you're feeling. Just those nuances, because it is much harder to build a relationship that's going to be lasting and that will allow you to fulfill your mission. But it's so easy for your mission to be I wouldn't say ruined, but your mission not to succeed by you simply saying the wrong thing at the, at the wrong time, or saying something to someone or not saying something to someone, and they now have a certain view of you, and sometimes that can turn into a whole community have a certain view of who you are. So really acquiring those interpersonal communication skills and cultural competence.
No, and that I think is a conversation we could have an hour or more on just that, about the miscommunication and that lack of cultural competency that you're talking about, which is really so critical. And even if one doesn't have it when one starts with a new organization or company, but it's something that really needs to be prioritized for people being working internationally, really, really critically important.
Monica, could I?
Oh, go ahead, yes.
Sorry, just to add on a bit, I worked for a year in the Central African Republic. And so the humanitarian setting is a sort of, with some practical recommendations. The humanitarian setting is a sort of evolving ecosystem full of different actors and moving pieces. So again, what everyone's been touching on is sort of, it's key to be able to communicate and collaborate effectively. And I think it's so, especially for humanitarian settings, more so than in development settings, I think being able to come with a toolkit that you have skills across the project management spectrum is always very useful and does make you a very competitive candidate for this organization. So in addition to the importance of a language, sort of being familiar with the budgeting process, with monitoring evaluation, and with resource development, like writing proposals, stuff like that, I think makes you, with a language skill, I think makes you a very attractive candidate for organizations that are sort of looking to very quickly fill in job vacancies.
No, also great advice. So let me transition, and I hope this is a question on the students' mind. It's a question that I get from my students all the time, and that is, students are really interested in doing humanitarian work or global health work internationally. What can they do to get some applied experience to get to do that work? What advice do you have for them to get started? Because it's like the chicken and egg stuff. A lot of times you need to have some experience to get more experience. So how would they get started? What is your advice?
I could make a few comments on that. I think a good way to get started is to be interested in the world and other people. I started as a boy interested in music from other countries. And then I went on a junior year abroad program from my university and took advantage of that to not come home from Europe by plane across the Atlantic, but to drive a Volkswagen down to India. Wow. And then go through the rest of what was between India and the United States. And then when I got out of college, I went into the Peace Corps because it was a way to get out there, in my case, in West Africa and the Côte d'Ivoire, teaching carpentry in a rural technical school. And I was out there by myself as an American, but I was with my students and with the community there. And was a part of that. And I had the backing from the Peace Corps medical office. I had a living allowance that was sent to me every month. It wasn't more than I would need to buy basic food and keep myself going. But there was a support there. And so it was talking about how do you get into it. There I was living in a community in West Africa. I was working as a teacher. I was getting support that allowed me as a young guy to be out there. And if anything really bad happened, which fortunately it didn't, I would have been saved. And then having finished with that service, I went to graduate school because I was interested in international affairs. And I would comment that Peace Corps has a Coverdale scholarship program for volunteers who finish 2 years. They can get all or part of their graduate school paid for by the Peace Corps. That's a big deal. I then went back into the Peace Corps as a staff person because I knew and loved the organization, and I had the skills to do what they needed at a kind of an entry-level position in the Peace Corps. I was also able to do it because Peace Corps volunteers who finish 2 years have, for 1 year after their service or for 1 year after they finish their graduate school, they have a non-competitive eligibility for federal jobs. So the Peace Corps didn't have to jump through hoops the way they normally would to hire somebody off the street. I had that non-competitive eligibility. So they said, we like you, you speak French, you've done Peace Corps, you're on. So, and then to go a little further with answering your question, having finished the Peace Corps, having worked in West Africa and in Brazil, I was a director in Brazil for a number of years. I then had an easy time being hired by John Deere, the agricultural machinery manufacturer, because they were looking for people who had that kind of Peace Corps experience, that they could go into a chaotic, undefined environment and make something happen, understand it and move with it. And I could speak by that time French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And so that then way leads on to way. So I started with an interest in music from the Caribbean, and then made a 52-year career in international work, and I'm still doing it.
Oh.
Monica, may I add on to that?
Yeah, no, but what a journey, and thank you for sharing that. And yes, go ahead, Brandy.
So I would like to say to all the students out there that I think that I'm a lot like a lot of them. I was the first one in my family to go to college. I wasn't, getting funded trips to go and build schools for weekends when I was in high school or anything. I had to really create those opportunities for myself. And I think the way that you do that is, number one, by, as Gregory said, having a worldview that's curious, surrounding yourself with international people, making sure that you're living more as a global member of the community than just stuck where you are, where I was, for example, was Kennesaw, Georgia. So, and then secondly, you have to be bold because there's a lot of opportunity out there. And sometimes all you do have to do is say yes. So you've got to really put yourself out there, say, I'm going to do this. And it starts adding up everything you try to do. I, for example, ended up going to teach in China when I was in college due to just coming across one of my friends that knew of an opportunity. I ended up joining the French assistance program because of one of my college professors who told me about it, told me she had done it. So I think that sometimes people look at humanitarian work and say, I can't do that unless I'm independently wealthy or I have connections, somebody in government, something like this. But that's not true. It is more difficult, but it is possible.
It requires those bold steps and passion. You really need to be passionate about the work. As was mentioned before, you don't pick that kind of career if it's money and fame that you want. You do it because you want to make a difference. And it's the same in global health. I mean, the fields are so interconnected. So thank you for sharing that. I know also students will have questions about fellowships and applied experiences. Do you have any of those scholarships within your organizations? If so, could we put some links in the chat box? We talked about Peace Corps and there were some. Does CARE have any sort of applied experiences that student can apply for? Is that part, or the Carter Center, do they have anything like a formal program like that?
Yeah, I'll quickly speak to CARE. I think we've got two sort of work streams when it comes to those. One, I know that CARE has a strong relationship with Georgia University. So I think we have summer internship programs with Agnes Scott, with Georgia State, with Georgia Tech, and with Emory. And I think particularly when you're in a master's program, there are that applied practicum experience in which graduate school. So I went to Rollins and I spent my summer working for Catholic Relief Services on a research opportunity in Uganda. So I was sort of contributing to their knowledge base of research and their existing project there. And I think that's one of the great things about graduate school is that those experiences are a lot more applied and they're a lot more specific and they're better for you to speak to. Because I think, my great advice I got before I went to graduate school was always think about your toolkit and kind of what you're adding to it and sort of and think of it in terms of skill sets and tools that you think could be helpful for another organization down the line. And so, yeah, I think CARE, it's either through your university and usually I would say that's the best medium to find those applied opportunities.
I would also,
Yeah, I was just going to hold on just a second. I was going to point everybody, thank you for the fantastic team behind the scenes. There are already some links in the chat box if you haven't checked. Go ahead.
yes, I would also add that some of you who are, in middle school, high school, or haven't graduated or at the graduate school level, but there's also, of course, studying abroad, is also a means of getting out there and looking for those scholarships and fellowships, but also mission. And like a lot of the missionaries do have programs, and it might be 6 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, and and sometimes being able to let the world know that this is something you're interested in. And sometimes it's all about who knows what you're interested in and who has a connection to be able to help you. I also believe that there's also Fulbright. So I was a Fulbright scholar and research, for grad school. That's how, I went. I'm one of those individuals who felt as though too many years of sitting in a classroom was just too much for me. I had to have the experience. And so for me, I had to have that on the ground experience to be able to understand what I was learning in the classroom. And so I applied for Fulbright and went to St. Lucia to do some research on men's sexual behaviors and how that impacts HIV programming. And that was a wonderful experience. And from there, I found out that Fulbright was offering another opportunity to do education. And so I applied to that, and I ended up in Paris working with UNESCO. So, it's just being able to look for the opportunities, find the opportunities, and be confident enough to apply even if you don't get accepted, but to keep going. And then letting the world know that this is your purpose, this is your mission, these are your goals, and asking individuals to help. So I really, and that, the previous question when you asked about, how to go about finding these opportunities, and I often work with young people. So any of young people who are out there who want mentoring or who would like for me to introduce them to that world of global health, please feel free to contact me. I love working with young people. But I tell individuals, look at the map and pick out 2-3 countries, write them down that you would love to travel to, and then do your research, do your homework, and find out, the internet, you could find a lot of information. But once you've done that, then find individuals here in the United States who are from those countries, make those connections. And because we have the internet, you might be able to connect with someone who's actually living in that country. So build those relationships so that when you do find the opportunity to go to that country, then you're more confident about what your experience may be.
No, and thank you for that. I'm going to alert the students. I know we already have a couple questions in our Q&A, but we're going to transition into the Q&A. I just wanted to share some points and building on Hermence's point here, that in addition to connecting with the people who may be from the countries where you want to go and study or continue working or getting experiences, I suggest that you think about finding mentors who can guide you, because again, even though a lot of things are available online and there are a lot of different programs, finding mentors who you may like kind of the path that they've taken, or at least who are flexible to sit down and take some time to guide you, and also find people who can write those letters of reference or service recommendations for you, because most of these programs will require some kind of thoughts about your skills and whether you're flexible and all of those things. So all that said, it just means that you need to start planning earlier, because all of this and position yourself and be competitive just really takes a little bit more planning. And so I'm sure that we have a lot of people smiling right now, because again, they signed up for this session, which probably means that they want to go study languages and study or work elsewhere. So I'm going to open up the chat box and take a peek at what questions we have from our attendees. All right, one of the questions that has floated to top here is that, what advice do you have for someone who has a desire to start their own international nonprofit? What are the obstacles, or what can you expect? What are pitfalls to avoid? What are your thoughts on that? How to start your own nonprofit? That is a big question, but clearly it was echoed by several of our attendees. Do we have any thoughts about that?
Was the question how to start your own international nonprofit, or how to get a job with one?
It seemed like to start your own. We have some very ambitious attendees, big plans.
Okay,
What would you advise?
I started my own company focused on corporate responsibility. That was after I had worked with one of the oil companies as their director of corporate responsibility, and that kind of emerged from what I had been doing before. So I'd make a couple of points. First, if you are running your own organization and you're funding it, you have to make sure you have enough money to pay your bills and to know that you're going to, if somebody's going to take the trash out, it's going to be you. If somebody's going to go meet with a client, it's going to be you. And you got to be ready to do all the work that your company does yourself, and to bring in other people that can work with you. And you got to have a good plan for it. Another point I'd like to make, and it kind of fits into the broader context of this discussion, is that humanitarian work doesn't only happen in the nonprofit sector or NGOs. Humanitarian work, in my experience, was definitely done in the Peace Corps, in U.S. Agency for International Development, but it was also done in the 3 corporations where I worked for many years. John Deere, the farm machinery manufacturer. Now, part of their humanitarian work in their context is to provide training in operation and maintenance of equipment. And a lot of people learn that and have productive, exciting lives doing that work because they learned it through a company. Why does the company do it? Because it wants to have people who know that kind of thing. They need them. A company like Bechtel, I worked with Bechtel, the construction company. They have a great interest when they're doing a big construction project that might last 5 years or 7 years to get the whole thing done. They have a really strong interest in having good relations with the community, as would an oil company. When I worked for the oil company as director of corporate responsibility, all these companies need to earn and keep their social license to operate, because if they don't have that, they can't work and they can't go to the places where they need to do what they do. So look at careers opportunities in global health or in other humanitarian sectors as something that's not just in the nonprofit sector, but also corporations, or you can do it yourself. And in doing that, know that you can skip from one, from the NGO group to the corporate group to the academic group to the government group, back and forth. It doesn't matter. The skills are basically the same. So if you're going to do your own company, make sure you've got a good plan and you know how you're going to pay for it, and you got some people that you can trust that are going to be working with you.
Yeah, no, great answer. Very complicated stuff. I mean, we appreciate the again being very ambitious. May want to ask yourself also, why would you want to have your own nonprofit? Is there some organization or nonprofit out there you may be able to partner with and collaborate with, at least as you start out? Because it's a big goal. It's a heavy lift to get the finances and get the collaboration and get the reputation to get the funding to do the work. Another question that has floated to the top here is for all the panelists. What is your favorite culture shock working in another country using their language? What might have happened to you that you want to share, sort of a personal anecdote about your work, or what that culture shock might have been?
Well, I'll share. That question, I love the question, by the way. It makes me chuckle because I've had so many. But for me, prior to joining the Peace Corps, prior to graduating from college, I decided that my junior year, I wanted to be as far away as possible from my campus. And I spun the globe and my finger landed on Ecuador. And at that time, I really knew nothing about Ecuador. I didn't speak Spanish, but I knew I just wanted to get as far away possible. And so I, looked up Ecuador, and then I found a program, MSID, a program that was taking students to Ecuador to help on various different ways, but reforestation. Now, mind you, I know nothing about taking care of a plant, more or less a tree, more or less planting a tree. And so, but, I said, why not? And next thing I knew, I was in Quito, and therefore, I was supposed to be there for a year, and everything was different, not just the language, but everything. And apparently, my research enough on the surface level wasn't enough. But my culture shock experience came a couple of months later, where I actually thought that things were going well, but I was stationed in a community, Muisni, off of the coast of Ecuador. So predominantly Afro-Ecuadorian community. And I remember it was one of those things where reforestation agent had a machete to my hip, boots up to my knees. And I was told to wake up by 4 o'clock in the morning and be by the river ready to board a little canoe by 6 o'clock. And so I was ready. So I get there at 5 o'clock, 5:30, and I'm thinking, okay, everyone's going to show up, and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And then 9 o'clock comes on, 10, and then the next thing I know, I see boats coming back, canoes, and they were like, oh, what happened? You weren't here. And I was like, yeah, I was here at 6. They were like, no, you were supposed to be here at 4, and we were giving you 6 minutes, to board. So like that in itself. And then 2 days later, meeting time. So we're supposed to have a meeting. And like I was saying earlier, I had my fancy waterproof watch that I had purchased right before going. And everyone came to, I showed up early, because I'm like, I'm going to get it right this time. And I'm there, and everyone shows up, and they're greeting each other, eating, just having a good time. But no, we're not getting down to business. Like, we're not discussing work. And I remember saying, what's going on? When are we going to start? And I kept complaining as the hour went by. And then this older gentleman came, and he was like, give me your hand, and I was like, I handed him my hand. He was like, no, the one with the watch. So I gave him, I showed him. He took my watch, grabbed it from me, and threw it into the river. And I was just like, what was that? He was like, you're not in America. We do things here based on how we feel. Time is how we feel. So you're going to wait. And that was when I realized that time is different. You have to be patient. You have to really know the customs, and you have to humble yourself and not go out there thinking that you know everything about how things are supposed to be run. So that was really a very enlightening moment. And that was culture shock. The fact that time was just so different.
Mm-hmm. Wow, great story. Sara or Brandy, do you have any stories to share? Culture shocks? Flora?
I have, well, I have a million, of course,
I'm sure.
but just to quickly address one of the more recent ones, before my position at the Carter Center, I was the in-country director for a maternal health NGO in central Haiti. So I was around a lot of babies, a lot of babies, newborn babies, little babies, big fat babies. And I learned very quickly that I had to suppress everything in me when I was around these babies, because in Haiti, you aren't supposed to be overly expressive towards a child in a way that's, complimentary, like, oh, your child's so beautiful. Oh, it's so cute. He's going to be so handsome. Because culturally, that's not acceptable. It brings the evil eye onto the child. You want to be pretty stoic and say, like, oh, you have a very, nice child, and end it with that. So it was something that I had to think about almost every day.
Yeah, no, I mean, coming from the US perspective, that is quite a bit transition. Sara, were you about to say something? Or Flora, I can't see you. Any thoughts that either of you would like to share?
No, I mean, I, as a Peace Corps volunteer, your whole 2 years are just you trying to get that sort of cultural competency. I think for me, one of the things that shocked me, or I guess was just knowing where food comes from. I think so I could have definitely bet my entire life that pineapples grew on trees, and my collaborator in Village was like, no, they don't, come here, and showed me the field of pineapples growing in their little pineapple thrones. And sort of in the US, we're so separated from the food systems that bring food to us that I think, it was a shock to me to see rice. Each grain of rice had its own little covering. And so that we have machines here that take care of that. But there's a lot of people that work hard and sort of are way closer to their food source. And I think just there's that cultural separation when you come back to the United States, and the aisles are full of 18 different kinds of shampoo and 5 kinds of rice and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think it should almost be a book, right? I'm sure we could all write. I was sharing with the panelists earlier before we had all the attendees join us that having worked in East Africa for a long time, I have a hard time ordering food. And I could not really figure out why I couldn't just order the meat or the goat or whatever. It turns out that when you translated it to the local language, you have to order it with the sauce. And I wasn't particularly interested in the sauce, but I didn't realize that that was how you actually had to talk about the protein. And so it wasn't until I became a language learner that when I learned how to express the food and my food choices in the local language, that I understood, aha, this is why I've had such a hard time. And why could nobody just explain it to me? And I think it goes back to that earlier point about the cultural competency and about understanding a culture through language, even if you just have some bare minimum words, again, greetings and some food items can really open your eyes to how to communicate better and get things done. But these culture shocks, whether they're intense or kind of over time, I'm sure are present for all of us, having worked in many different settings. Another question that came in on the chat here, the Q&A, is about the current environment. So in this current climate, are there any issues that could prevent students or graduates from being able to participate in volunteer teams or working abroad in humanitarian efforts? So I think it's implied here we're talking about COVID perhaps, and other concerns about safety. So could any of you panelists speak to that? What do you think the future holds? For example, is the Peace Corps, are you launching the programs? Are people going out back in the field? What is the status for all these organizations? Are you working internationally? I mean, I'm sure you are, but would you send students and teams abroad at this point? Or when do you think it might happen?
Let me say a word about Peace Corps in that regard. From March 15th to March 23rd, we withdrew 7,300 volunteers from 61 countries to be ahead of COVID so that we wouldn't have volunteers out there and have COVID threatening them and not be able to take care of them. So now there are no Peace Corps volunteers serving anywhere in the world. We are committed to returning to all the countries where we were working before COVID and to go back full strength. And we've maintained our staff, local and US, in all those countries. So we're being very careful about the criteria for returning the volunteers to their countries or new volunteers going into a country to which they had applied. And so a lot of that has to do with COVID. It also has to do with movement and life within the country. It has to do with the receptivity of people in the country and in the community to the volunteers. So we're being very careful about it. And just a few days ago, the Peace Corps director announced that we are returning, and Hermence, you'll be happy to hear this since you served there, will be our first country to receive volunteers coming back will be St. Lucia in the Caribbean. And that's because they are handling COVID in a good way and it's not a threat. And there are flights in and out and you can move around. But we will be going over the period of time that it takes to do it safely. We'll be returning to all those countries and we're going to great lengths to make sure that the volunteers will be safe and that the communities will be safe as the volunteers return to them. So it's a delay, but it's not an impediment because we're being very careful about it. And if you're invited to go, you can be very sure that it's going to be safe.
Okay. No, it's a very, very good and very thoughtful answer, and I'm glad. And as someone who does a lot of work in Africa, I know a lot of the countries are opening up, and the situation look very different there than, for example, here in the U.S. and in Europe. So I'm sure that it's going to vary a bit by country, and I'm sure it's going to vary a little bit of what happens here. As an epidemiologist, I'm a little concerned about what the future holds for us here in the U.S., but we'll just kind of do our social distancing and wearing our mask and do our best to kind of keep this on as best as we can. But I think those are all that we have
Monica,
time
may
for.
I add something really quick? I'm so sorry. I know, I just want to make sure I get this in before the end. The Carter Center has a robust internship program on both the peace and health sides. Currently, our interns are all working remotely. So we'll see how that goes. If you're either a college student, recent grad, or grad student, you can apply to that. And finally, just really quickly, I want to encourage everyone out there, if you're interested in public health, if you're interested in human rights, the political climate in the US right now is rife with opportunities to learn more about human rights and public health. You don't have to start in the field. You can start right here at home, learning the basics of what you're into, and it'll be very valuable to you in the future.
And thank you. We wouldn't want to miss that. Thank you for sharing that. Very important work. So before we wrap up today, I just want to highlight you three more things. And that is that the recordings of all these panel discussions, so this might have been the first one you joined us for, but there have been panel sessions all week. And the recordings will be available on the CULTR website. So please go check if you missed the panel, if you want to hear us again. You can always or share it with friends who you think might be interested but who didn't know about this or couldn't attend. And we want you to keep the conversation going. I think it's clear from perhaps listening to us. I hope that we've conveyed our enthusiasm for humanitarian work, for global health. It takes a lot of passion, it takes perseverance. So I think those of us who do this work would do it because we love it. And so engage with us on this conversation. There's going to be a post-event survey. Please share your thoughts. Go to the website and share your comments because we're always looking for ways to improve and to engage. And I also wanted to highlight there's going to be one more panel just after this, 2 to 3 o'clock. It's going to be a Peace Corps panel in French. So if French is your thing and Peace Corps is your thing, we really encourage you to log on again at 2 o'clock. But with that, I want to say thank you to our panelists again for sharing your experience, for the amazing work that you do in your organizations and your companies, sharing your trajectories and your stories, and taking time again to interact with our students, because this is learning at the best, and we're doing what we can in the virtual setting. So I'm applauding with my smile, hoping that you know how grateful I am, and of course to CULTR for organizing this and really doing a phenomenal job bringing us all together and hosting and reaching so many of the students out there. So with that, I think we're good. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend, and keep up all the great global work that you do.
Thank you, Monica. Thank
Merci.
you. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Obrigado.